Uh, Greetings and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about it's an appraisal of the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857-58. I won't go into the causes, consequences, and events. It's in an academic fashion. It's not my intention to add something to the scholarly literature. One can literally build a house with the English language material of the Sepoy Mutiny, let alone the French and Indian primary sources, and primary and secondary sources. Anyway, so it's about how I perceive the mutiny. It's not something. It's not meant to be academic. It's not meant to be politically correct. It's not even meant to be condescending towards any community or any group, any ethnic group, any nationality, whatever. For me, it's the mutiny basically is basically it's a kind of failure on the part of the British administration to create a modern army. I mean, they failed also after. I mean, in the aftermath of the mutiny, they brought some changes, but they failed to create a Europeanized force. After the mutiny, they brought in the theory of, I mean, they started the recruitment in accordance with the theory of this martial races. But before, if we look at the recruitment patterns in the Bengal army, I'm not talking about the Madras and Bombay armies, it was strictly confined to certain classes of society living in the Gangetic plains, which included both Hindus and Muslims. Muslims predominate in the cavalry and artillery. But so, be it, I mean, in the, I mean, if you take any expedition, all the expeditions of which military expeditions, and all the wars which they waged against all different native kingdoms, like Anglo-Mysore War, the Anglo-Maratha War, the Anglo-Sikh War, and the Anglo-Afghan War. The Sepoy regiments played, comparatively speaking, a minor role. Their role was to act as a support again to the European regiments. So when the Europeans retreated, especially that happened in Afghanistan, Sepoys just followed suit. Sepoys seldom made any last stand. That sort of thing was conspicuous by its very absence. And the Sepoys, despite all those drills and all those things, they retained their religious customs. They were the least Europeanized section of society. Yeah, I mean, under the rule of the East India Company, despite being living in close proximity, they were a retrograde, a reactionary force. There was nothing modern about them. And that's precisely the reason that they could conceive of any political action by means of restoration of erstwhile native political forces. So those cowardly sepoys at Meerut, after massacring the European officers and innocent European civilians, civilians they marched off to Delhi, and later they proclaimed the Mughal emperor. I mean, as the last scion of the Mughals, Bahadur Shah Zafar, as the emperor, because their political horizon was so limited that they couldn't, conceive of anything else. Academics make much of that court of administration which the rebels established in the city of Delhi while the British were besieging them outside the ridge. But that's very minor thing. This was just an ad hoc arrangement. It didn't mean much, and their when during the mutiny, obviously all these mutinous sepoy regiments were left to their own devices. So when they waged war, they conspicuously failed, even under their own subadars, yeah, the native non-commissioned highest native non-commissioned officers. They even so. What I mean to say is that they, despite serving in the army for decades, they fail to learn the rudimentary or the basics of military technique, military strategy. Despite that uniform, despite those red coats, despite their shining muskets with bayonets, it was just a force of bandits. I mean, they had turned into a force of bandits after they mutilated. And one gets surprised at the ease with which they attacked different places at Kanpur, at Danapur, at Jagdishpur, in Lucknow, in Delhi, in Ambala, Lucknow, all these places, in Jhansi. They just rounded up their European officers and just massacred them. As in Kanpur, there was, led by Lieutenant Wheeler, there was a resistance. The British resisted. In Lucknow, they're led by Henry Lawrence. The British fortified the residency and they struggled there. In Delhi, there was a massacre. There were very few survivors. One conspicuous being Sir Theophilus Metcalfe. He lost everything but still managed to flee. And it was due to the energetic leadership of people like Sir John Lawrence and commanders like uh, John Nicholson, who, through their own uh, superb strategy and rapidity of action, they restored the military balance. So they neutralized the overwhelming numerical superiority enjoyed by the sepoys and brought a semblance of equality in the conflicts that later followed. Um, One also gets the idea that there was also a restorationist, Mughal restorationist element in this, in the I think throughout the mutiny. It was certainly an attempt was made to resurrect the forces of the Crescent against the rule of the Cross, and that was the most retrograde phenomenon of the mutiny. Had it had it not been for British foresight and military valor, um, this unfortunate country would have again come under the subjugation of those native barbaric forces who only thrive in plunder and revel in brutality. Perhaps it was the decree of God that led to the defeat of these criminal, dastardly, semi-barbaric sepoys and led to their complete defeat, leading to their complete defeat. It was also a failure of Europeanization, cultural proselytization on the part of the British. Unlike the Portuguese and French, the British they largely frowned upon any attempts by any attempts of cultural any attempts of Europeanization on the part of their subjects. Yet, much has been said of British racism, but I don't think that played any part in that mutiny. The mutiny was bound to happen, as long as when the sepoys they were just like wild animals, if let loose. So when they saw that the balance of power was in their favor, so they just like wild beasts of prey emerging from the Gangetic plains, they just pounced on the helpless Englishmen who were nearby and slaughtered them. The most infamous one being the Bibi Gar massacre in Kanpur, organized by Nandana Sahib, the last descendant of the Peshwas, of Maratha Peshwas. And similarly, in the Red Fort, the Badushah Zafar supervised massacres of European women and children who were unfortunately held captive there. Female European captives were forcibly converted to Islam and married off to renegade cavalrymen. So it was a very, how should I describe it? It was a very, it was basically hell let loose. That's what happened. Similar thing happened in 1947. Let's see what Providence has in store. If God is merciful and God bestows mercy on his servants, then I would pray to God that all the descendants of these sepoys and renegades, all those the descendants of those sepoys, renegades, and murderers today who are now ruling, thriving, not just in this country, but also in some of the neighboring so-called countries. Let they be defeated. Let their powers be broken. One can only hope and pray for such an outcome. That's it. Thanks for listening.